So as we come to the end of another week, we will be continuing in this journey entitled The Storied World of the Bible. I'm going to say the Jesus Creed out loud together, and we're going to dive into the next session as this coming week will bring this incredible journey to a close. But today, at the end of week 45, we will do the next installment of this incredible story. So let's say the Jesus Creed out loud together and dive into our session. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commands greater than these. Okay, next session, let's watch it together.
While I was speaking and was praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God on behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen before in a vision, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He came and said to me, Daniel, I have now come out to give you wisdom and understanding. At the beginning of your supplications a word went out, and I have come to declare it, for you are greatly beloved. So consider the word and understand the vision. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. As we look back through the extraordinary range of what we find in the Hebrew Scriptures in the Old Testament, we see the storyline developing, taking shape, and still pointing forward, a story in search of a conclusion. It's rooted in that great sequence in the Pentateuch, in Genesis, Exodus, all the way through to Deuteronomy. That sets the framework and the terms, but it also points forward to the great covenantal scene in which God has made a covenant with his people, but knowing that they will themselves go wrong and themselves be needing rescue. So we find in those last chapters of Deuteronomy not a glad conclusion that here we are, we're all right, everything's going to be okay, but rather here is a project which still has to be fulfilled, still has to be unfolded. But at the base of it, it is all about God the Creator, God the God who has made a good creation and has made it as a temple, a heaven and earth reality, and has put human beings at the middle of it to reflect his glory into the world and reflect the praises of creation back to God himself. And the people who are carrying this vision have to know that they are the people who are rescued from the power of evil. So they are the Exodus people, the Passover people. And that continues. They carry about with them the knowledge that when all goes wrong, God is the Passover God who's going to rescue them. And so through the time of exile, they carry with them the hope that there will be a new Exodus, a new Passover, a real return from exile. And as we've seen, they carry also the knowledge that the exile seems to be continuing, that even after some of them have come back from Babylon, there is a sense that because the pagans are ruling over them, the long period of exile spoken of by Daniel chapter 9 still hasn't come to the end. And so the narrative of the Old Testament ends with a question mark. How and when is this going to happen? What will it look like when God comes back, when God reestablishes his covenant, when God does finally what he's promised to do, maybe sending a king like David, a new David who will be the true shepherd of his people, but also coming himself in person, coming to feed his flock like a shepherd, to gather the lambs in his arms and gently to lead the mother sheep. What will it look like when there is a new temple? What will it look like when there is finally forgiveness of sins, the end of exile, which had been the result of the people's idolatry? All these questions are focused again and again in the Psalms. And when we imagine the Jewish people of the Second Temple period and then of the time of Jesus and Paul, we have to imagine a psalm-singing people. They knew these poems. These were their hymn book. They were the stuff of their prayer. And for many of them, the Psalms would be the place they would go back to day by day, because the Psalms both celebrate the goodness of God, celebrate the call of Israel, and also lament the fact that everything seems to have gone horribly wrong. As we've seen, some of them, like Psalm 89, hold these two side by side, and they don't give a resolution. Others of them just say, well, yes, it starts off really going badly, but then at the end, all things come round and are solved, like Psalm 22, which starts, my God, why did you abandon me?" but ends with a ringing shout of triumph that the kingdom is the Lord's and he is the governor among the peoples. Or some, like Psalm 24, which simply celebrate that God is coming to be king in Zion. God, the Creator, is now the God who is going to live in Jerusalem, and we welcome him, and all will be well. But others, like Psalm 88, simply lament that everything has gone horribly wrong, and there is no hope in sight except for the knowledge that God is still God. Because even Psalm 88, while describing all the bad things that have happened, says, "You have done this. You have put lovers and friends far from me, so that darkness is my only companion." That is a very scary and worrying psalm, but it's a psalm that many people find they have to pray when things get to that particular point. And so the Psalms carry the story of Israel. They carry the double-edged story, the story of Israel as the people of God, pointing forwards to the great things God is going to do, but the story also of Israel as a rebel people who, though they are the bearers of the promise, are also the carriers of the problem. And these things go on side by side throughout the Psalter. But again and again, we come back to the promises of creation and new creation. And so even in some very short psalms, like Psalm 67, we have the entire story of the people of God encapsulated in a prayer. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face to shine upon us. This goes back to the Aaronic blessing in Numbers chapter 6, that God's way may be known on earth, your saving power among all nations. And then the psalmist looks out at the wider world, and this was the purpose of Israel all along. Remember with Abraham, in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So the psalmist prays, let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you judge the peoples with equity and guide the nations upon earth. There is the vision of a world put to rights, of God doing not just for Israel, but for the whole world, what he's promised to do. And then it's also a harvest song. The earth has yielded its increase, and God, our God, has blessed us. So when the people of Israel look on the goodness of God in creation, what they then see is not only present blessing, but also future blessing, not only future blessing for Israel, but future blessing for the whole world. May God continue to bless us. Let all the ends of the earth revere him. And we find the same in some of those great shouts of triumph, as in Psalm 47. Clap your hands, all you peoples. Shout to God with loud songs of joy. For the Lord the Most High is awesome, a great king over all the earth. So many of the Psalms are celebrating the kingdom of God, the fact that God is king over the whole world. And so the psalm goes on. He subdued peoples under us and nations under our feet. He chose a heritage for us, the pride of Jacob whom he loves, the inheritance which was the land, but the inheritance which now goes out to embrace the world. God is king over the nations. God sits on his holy throne. The princes of the people gather as the people of the God of Abraham. For the shields of the earth belong to God. He is highly exalted. This is the worldwide vision. We have to remind ourselves how ridiculous this must have sounded. A tiny little nation focused in this one strip of territory in the eastern end of the Mediterranean, claiming that their God is in fact the God of the whole earth. That was a statement of faith. It was a statement of hope. But then in the New Testament, it becomes a statement of purpose and of mission as the message of Jesus goes out into all the world. And so those great psalms of judgment and mercy come into their own. Psalms in the 90s, 96 and 98 particularly, which are ringing affirmations of new creation, new covenant and new creation. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, bless his name. Declare his glory among the nations. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. This is calling to all the nations to worship this Creator God. Worship the Lord in holy splendor. Tremble before him all the earth. This is temple language, and it is therefore also creation language. Say among the nations, the Lord is king. The world is firmly established, it shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Again, resonating all the way back to Genesis 1 and picking up with that the vision of God's justice, putting things right at last in Isaiah 11 and so many other passages. And the whole of creation is going to be drawn into this celebration. Let the heavens be glad and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he is coming to judge the earth. And we who hear that word judge are often tempted to think of it as purely negative, as though he's just going to say bad things and smash the place up. No, this means he's coming to put it right. He will judge the world with righteousness and the peoples with his truth. Perhaps one only really appreciates that if one has been through either a lawsuit that has been very badly managed and the other side have bribed the judge, or if one has lived as an oppressed people longing for somebody to come and sort out the world so that wicked people and oppressors can no longer do what they've been doing for so long. Finally, someone is coming to sort it out. That's the message. That's the message which arises as a prayer from so many hearts and minds throughout the world to this day. But it's the message which Psalms 96 and 98 and many others put out for us as a prayer, as a celebration. 98, sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. The Lord has made known his victory. And here we have that theme, as with the book of Exodus, as with Isaiah, the victory over Babylon, so with the New Testament, the victory over all the dark powers that have enslaved humans, have enslaved the nations. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Let the sea roar again. Let the floods clap their hands, and let the hills sing together for joy, because the Lord is coming. He's coming to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness and the peoples with equity. And as we look ahead to John's Gospel, as we look ahead to the letter to the Romans, as we look ahead to the book of Revelation, we see where this story is actually going, that something then happens in Jesus and through Jesus, in his death and in his resurrection, and in the power of the Spirit which goes out from there into all the world, coming to put all things right, not just to give a new religious option for some human beings if they fancy that sort of thing, but rather coming to sort out the mess that is in the whole world. So we have in the Hebrew Scriptures, we have a great story, which is God's story, which is then the story of creation with humans at the middle of it. It's the story of Israel called to be the promise-bearing humans, the story which then turns into or is focused upon David and his family, the ones who are specially charged with this strange task of ruling God's people and of bringing God's justice to the world. And of course, with that vocation, there goes the parallel temptation to abuse the vocation, and David's family take every opportunity, it seems sometimes, to do exactly that. But nevertheless, the promise to David, the promise to Abraham, the promise ultimately to humans and to creation itself, that God is God and his purposes are going to be fulfilled. And so the story of the Old Testament moves into what we call the Second Temple period, or the intertestamental period, the period between the Old and New Testaments, with this strange sense of hope and of purpose and of promise, but without a definite shape. They've got all these strands coming together, but nobody quite knows what it'll look like when it gets to where it's going. And so many people in that period, between roughly 400 BC and the time of Jesus, many people try out different solutions. Is it to be a political or a military solution? Are we to have a revolution against the powers that have enslaved us? They tried that roughly 2 centuries before Jesus at the time of the Maccabees, and some of them really thought the new age had come. We've got rid of the Syrians at last. We are going to be free in our own land. And so they were for a short period. But then others came in, and ultimately the great power of Rome from much further west in the Mediterranean came and took over the whole of that part of the world. And once again, the people of God were enslaved. And we imagine them praying these psalms. We imagine them thinking through what it might look like for God to come and do new creation, for God to renew the covenant, for the promises of Ezekiel to be fulfilled, and for people to have a new heart and a new spirit. And so some tried to intensify the keeping of the law. Some tried to say we must work out in minute detail what it might look like to keep the law, because that will enable us to be the people of God in our hearts and minds. And that was where the Pharisaic movement came from. And Pharisees like Saul of Tarsus in the first century believed that they were the ones who were spearheading this renewal movement. And Jesus, of course, then has a controversy with the Pharisees and says, you're only cleansing the outside and the inside still has to be cleansed. And some were looking for a Messiah, for a king who would come. There are many messianic movements in the century or so before and after Jesus, as people thought maybe a new David is going to arise. Maybe there's going to be a great prophet who will lead some kind of renewal. And it's in that atmosphere of expectation, of prayer, of hope, where they are praying the Psalms, studying the prophets, going back to Genesis and saying, this is what we want to happen. It's in that atmosphere that John the Baptist appears in the wilderness, announcing a baptism, a pouring out of water, as in Ezekiel 36, a crossing of water, as in the Exodus, something which symbolizes new covenant, which symbolizes return from exile, which symbolizes new Exodus, new Passover, which speaks therefore powerfully of forgiveness of sins, both at the individual level and at the corporate level. And it's within that context that Jesus of Nazareth comes and is baptized by John. And Jesus hears a voice saying the words which combine Psalm 2 and Isaiah 42, the words which therefore draw that whole millennia-long story onto one point. You are my son, my beloved. With you I am well pleased. And with that, we discover the story reaching something which is obviously its climax, but something which nobody had foreseen in this particular form.